Calling the roll, Ms. Simon.
Oh, I was supposed to say we're here today for June 5th, Cuyahoga County Education Environment Sustainability Committee meeting, and we are starting at about 3:08. Roll call.
Calling the roll, Ms. Simon.
I'm here.
Ms. Brown. Here. Mr. Jones. Here. Ms. Stevens. Ms. Stevens is absent at the moment. Mr. Brady.
Here.
There is a quorum. Also like the record to reflect that Councilman Miller is in attendance.
It's from our last meeting, May 1st. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So move.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Minutes approved from May 1st. A lot of discussion on bags. We're moving on to trees. No matters referred to committee. However, there was an item pulled from the Board of Control, and asked the Madam Clerk if she could read the item.
The item is item U from resolution number 2019-0128. It's an appropriation increase for the subsidy account for the county executive's new tree planting initiative.
I want to correct myself. It was from our fiscal agenda from the last council meeting. So do we have anybody here to speak about this appropriation increase? Director Foley.
Thanks, Councilwoman Simon and members of the committee. And with me is Jan Ripka from the Soil and Water Conservation District and Susan Infeld from our County Planning Department. And we've got a presentation, if we can walk through it with you. Sure. Okay. So we, as you stated, there was a $1 million item that was on the fiscal agenda that was referred to committee. And this was around a tree canopy program that the county executive and the administration is proposing to spend about $1 million a year on reforesting what we call the Forest City, generally Cuyahoga County. So as I've talked to you and others, one of the things I think we want to talk about is why this is important and how it also fits into some of the work we're doing in sustainability and planning and soil and water. As you may know, we've been working on a climate change action plan over the last 9 months or so, and this is a piece of that climate change action plan to put more trees back into the communities that exist in the county. Just so you know, generally we've lost a lot of trees in this county over the last many years. City of Cleveland has lost about half its tree canopy since 1950. A lot of the first ring suburbs has lower tree canopies than even the city of Cleveland does right now. So there's a real need, and we're going to talk about it in a couple of minutes about why trees are important, why they're both for climate, but also for a lot of other reasons, and why we think this is an important project. So if I can we'll walk through our some of the elements of our climate change action plan. Right, and Janine, I've lost us already. So. Sorry.
So the committee knows this climate action plan has been in the works for months, and it was a collaborative process. I don't know if you're going to talk about that with the Board of Health. Oh, you are? Good. It's an impressive document and very detailed, so thank you.
Okay. All right, so is it up now? Thanks. Okay, so correct. We spent a lot of energy and time over this over the last at least 9 months. It's one of the things that when we did a strategic plan and we talked about this is thinking about how climate is going to affect the county is something that's very important. We want climate plans usually have two components. One is kind of mitigating the amount of greenhouse gases or hurt we're putting into the atmosphere in terms of carbon dioxide, methane, other gases that trap heat in the world, and also adapting to climate change as we know it's going to happen. Cuyahoga County in and of itself is not going to solve the world's climate change, but we feel we have a part to do and a part to play, and we have an obligation to minimize our impact as much as possible. So our plan has been, we've met with over 30 organizations throughout the county. And the plan is just recently published on the county planning website a couple weeks ago with kind of all the elements that we think are important in it. We've had especially county health, health department has worked on this. County planning has been very instrumental, especially kind of being the housing for where the plan is kept. And soil and water conservation district, which work especially has been very helpful in trying to think about the impacts that the county is going to face in terms of climate change. One of the things we did is we hired a group called the Brendel Group to come in and help us think through what are our missions, how are we, how do we measure ourselves in terms of greenhouse gases we're putting up into the atmosphere out of Cuyahoga County. We've got a whole separate slide deck I can go through at a different time, but basically since 2010, we've seen about a 10% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions coming from Cuyahoga County. And most of that is coming out of the energy sector and electricity specifically. People are more energy efficient. The nature of the grid, the electric grid has changed, so there's less coal on the electric grid, there's more natural gas, there's more renewables on the electric grid. So that has really driven kind of the reductions in greenhouse gases since 2010, about a 30% reduction in just energy in the electric sector. Natural gas has gone down a little bit because we're a little bit more efficient for heating purposes. Transportation has been roughly stagnant. In fact, there's been a little bit of increase in greenhouse gases coming out of the transportation sector. And one of the things we know is that there's more cars on the road than there are now than there were in 2010. Public transportation is which is a way that is a cleaner way for people to get around, has seen a great reduction in their ridership. We've seen about half the people ride RTA today than they did in 2006. So transportation is kind of an area that we know we're going to have to work on in the future. This slide, though, is we tried to just compare ourselves to other jurisdictions throughout the country. So just so you know, we're doing better than Louisville, Kentucky in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. We're doing better than the United States as a whole, and we're doing better than the state of Ohio as a whole. But places like Boulder, Colorado, Detroit is doing better than we are. Clark County, Nevada, which is Las Vegas, I think, right? So you can see the list. Philadelphia, Toronto is really doing a much better job than we are in terms of greenhouse gas emission reductions. One of the things we want to look at is how is climate change going to affect the county and how has it already affected the county? So this is a slide that just talks about the temperature increases that we have already seen in Cuyahoga County. So if you look at the slide bar to the right, this is the average temperature across the whole year. And the average temperature now is about 50 degrees. And that's over the last 10 years. That 10-year average has seen almost a 1 degree increase since the last 30-year temperature average, and a little bit, about 7/10 of a degree, and 9/10 of a degree over the 100-year average. So they look at these things in kind of long-term, not just year to year to year, but kind of long-term tranches. And the last 10 years, we've seen a pretty remarkable increase in the average temperature across the year over the last 30 years. And so we also looked at what do we expect the temperatures are going to be in the county. And so this is a graph that just talks about what based on modelings done by scientists who think about this and work on this stuff all the time. This is what the projected average daily temps are going to be. And there's kind of different scenarios, high emission scenarios and low emission scenarios. But even with the low emission scenario, you can see that we're still going to see temperature increases in the county, in the county, and across the country and across the world. This is another statistic, just 95-degree days. So we're going to see a lot more higher heat days in the summer. So this is, and it's the same thing around higher emission scenarios and lower emission scenarios. But worst case scenario is we may see by the year 2020, 50 days a year in the summer where you've got temperatures over 95 degrees. The other thing we're going to see is more precipitation. So same thing, we looked at the 100-year average, the 30-year average, and the 10-year average. And the 10-year average has already seen about almost 4 inches more over the last 10 years in terms of precipitation than the 100-year average. So And, we're already an area that has, we've got stormwater problems. We've got, we're kind of old sewer system. And so the more precipitation, the more stormwater that comes into the system, those are things that we're going to have to address. And the sewer district is working hard to address right now. But this may mean we have even more problems to address in the future. So more precipitation. And the other thing we know is that we're going to see more severe storms. So we're going to see more precipitation in general, but it's be coming down in more bunches. And so this is 10-year average, 30-year average, 100-year average again. And over the last 10 years, we've seen we're seeing more violent storms, basically. So storms where you're getting at least an inch or more of rain or in an eventfall. So we're seeing more. It'll be coming in larger bursts of storm segments. Just a couple other slides that would just kind of talk about the just effect of climate change in the region. So this is a slide. This is through 2010. This is ice coverage on the Great Lakes. And there's actually a later slide, another slide. I just couldn't find it today, but it goes through 2017. But it basically shows the same trend. So we've seen a significant reduction in the amount of ice coverage on Lake Erie. And so if you look at Lake Erie, I think it's about a 50% reduction since 1973 to 2010 in terms of ice coverage. Lake Superior, I think, or was it Lake Ontario, is seeing a much 88% decrease. Lake St. Clair is 37%. But all the Great Lakes are seeing the same thing. So you're seeing less ice coverage. You're seeing ice form later in seasons and be reduced back earlier in the spring season. So, which leads to more kind of evaporation, and it means that the lakes basically have more opportunities for invasive species to come into them, and it means that fish patterns are going to change, where fish are, where they're concentrated at. So it's just a concern, I think that we should all know. One of the things we were able to find is so when we do have high heat days, it doesn't affect the county across the board in just one kind of, if it's a 95-degree day, it may be lower in one place and higher than another place. And so there's a student from, I think it's Kent State University, was able to kind of think about how does temperature differentiate in our county based on, days where we've got 90 degrees days. And so the blue sections where you've got more trees, by the way, are areas where it's cooler. The areas that are red or yellow are where it's warmer. And so if you look at I don't know if it's hard to see, but there's the kind of index to the left talks about, those red areas are about 5 degrees warmer than what the median is, and the blue area is about 5 degrees cooler than what the median is. So it's a big gap that can happen in the county, about a 10-degree difference. Just another map, just kind of exemplify this, but we've already seen our growing season change. So we used to be in zone 6, now we're in zone 5. This is just a change in the growing season from 1990 to 2015.
Which is going to affect the trees as well, because it's going to affect the trees because the warmer weather, so the species that are cold weather species are not going to be able to survive as well. So places like Chicago are already planting mid-Atlantic and those kind of southern trees to kind of be ahead of the whole climate change issue.
And so Councilwoman Simon mentioned the health department's was helpful in our climate change action plan. They're looking at this as well. And so they're in the middle of doing their own climate change action report just around health consequences. But some of the things they're looking at are just kind of health impacts of extreme weather, some more violent storms, food safety, nutrition, access issues, vector-borne diseases. Because the growing seasons are, the freezing seasons are shorter, we're going to see more bugs, more mosquitoes, more things we're not used to, and the seasons grow longer, and so there's more opportunities for diseases because of those bugs to be around. Water supplies and waterborne illnesses, same thing. They're worried about just kind because we've got less freezing, there's just more opportunities for viruses to get into the water system or other bacteria to get into the water system. Air quality issues, with high heat days, especially, one of the things we'll talk about in a little bit is that there's more, you've got more cars are running around, that you've got more ground level ozone that attaches itself to communities, which affects, we're already a high asthma community in the first place, and so ground level ozone is a trigger for asthma and asthma attacks, and so we're going to have air quality issues because of high heat days, basically, or more heat. And then mental health and well-being is one of the things they're looking at. So you get more days with high temperatures, people get crankier, right? And there's an absolute correlation between heat and crime and mental health problems. So it's one of the things that they're starting to think through. What do we, how do we address this, or think about addressing? So it's basically, we're at the 4 W's. We're going to have warmer, wetter, wilder weather that we see in the future, and those are the things that we know we're going to have to be thinking about and working on addressing. So as we put together our climate change action plan, we've looked at 5 key focus areas to think about how can the county react to climate change as it occurs. And those are energy. Can we get to 100% renewable energy by 2050? Transportation, we want to work to getting more cleaner fuel vehicles on the road. We want more public transportation. We want to figure out how to do more bike and pedestrian access for people so they don't have to rely on cars if they don't need them, or other transportation systems. Natural systems, we want to protect what we have and expand our natural systems. So we've got this great, wonderful Lake Erie out there that places in the world would kill to have all that fresh water, right? We've got this great river system. People would kill for that. So working on protecting that is really important. Health, as we talked about, there's just going to be health consequences to climate change that our health department's trying to think about being ready for. We've already seen, I should have added this, but they've got slides now that just show there's more kind of vector-borne diseases, but more instances of West Nile virus and deer flu, deer ticks, and all that stuff that are happening in Ohio, and it's kind of categories of things that are just kind of ramping up gradually every year in terms of more things they're having to deal with. And then land use, which is what we're going to talk about a little bit more today, and Jan and Susan are going to walk through. But development policies, when we're going to think about, where are we encouraging development to happen? County Executive Budish said one of the things we want to do is think about developing around, making sure that there's transit. If there's transit there, that we're supporting that, and so we're supporting that with maybe development preferences for areas around that have access to transit. We want to see if there's more green space. We want to support more green space. But the thing we're here to talk about today is more trees, right? So as we talked about, the tree canopy really has kind of been diminished over the years, and we think there's a really important reason to support more trees. So I'm going to turn it over. I forget who's next here. I think Susan's up next, yeah.
Looks like me. Okay, back to climate action, that as there are hazardous climate events, there are certain populations that the Board of Health tracks and has data showing that it affects populations based on their age, income, and also their zip code.
So what is the tree canopy? So I think going back to the slide, with your climate action plan goals, that, the whole idea of a tree canopy or the benefits of the tree canopy are certainly dovetail into all of those goals. And you can see them there, everything from trees shading a house so you don't have to use as much energy to cool your house, to reducing stormwater. You probably all walk down the street, especially in communities, the older communities, where like 2 days after a rainstorm, you're walking, all of a sudden you feel like, is it raining out? Because those trees and the bark hold the water. So it's slowing down the water. It's lessening the impact on, erosion, lessening the amount of water that's going into the system. And Mike is right that we have aging capital system, our sewers and whatnot. And, you know, sewers, like anything else, it's like a glass. You know, think of it as a vessel, and it can only hold so much water. So if you can attenuate that storm water a little bit, you're keeping it out, you're not overloading the system. So the trees have a benefit in that regard. Reducing air pollution, Mike already talked about that. You know, asthma, you know, some of you, you know, probably know people that have been severely affected by asthma. It is a killer. It can be a killer. Providing wildlife habitat. It's amazing how many people really do enjoy seeing wildlife, and to provide those opportunities for the animals, whether they be birds or the pollinators that are so much, very much needed, that having that habitat is the whole ecosystem. And then the social and educational opportunities. People love being outside and exploring nature, and having that ability for people to get involved in planting trees and maintaining them. And it goes into the human health and, you know, benefits as well. And just the aesthetic benefits. You know, I know there are some people that think of trees as being a nuisance because they have to rake the leaves. But I'm here to tell you that raking leaves or working in your garden, it's hard to think negative thoughts, to obsess about things when you're doing something that actually kind of feels good and has some of those benefits, you know, getting some exercise. But aesthetic benefits, who doesn't want to live in a city that's green, you know, and beautiful? And I think about the neighborhoods, and having grown up and still living in the city of Cleveland, you know, and I go to other places and don't see trees. To me, it's a real loss. So I think trees provide kind of a mental benefit as well. So anyway, Mike already said about how our tree canopy has changed. You know, the stories were that a squirrel could go from New York to Chicago just hopping along on trees. I don't know how you actually verify that, but that was the old wives' tale from many, many years ago. And our tree inventory is declining. And, you know, when the county executive announced this at the State of the County, his address to the State of the County, that it's not a moment too soon. You know, Cleveland's, you know, tree canopy study, it was like, 4 years ago, and 19% and falling. The county's average is 37%. You know, so of course, you know, you take the county, that includes Cleveland, includes the inner ring, 37% and falling. And some of it's not just the city of Cleveland that's lost tree canopy, it's also some of the suburbs, and some of the suburbs like Bedford or Warrensville that you might not, you know, actually think about. So the ability to get more trees on the ground, the time is now for all those reasons we already talked about. And the sooner we do it, the better it's going to be for everyone. Okay, so I think you kind of get the gist of that. So I kind of went through all that already. I don't do slow. So who's doing the importance of trees?
Yeah, back to me, a little bit of science here. Okay, in the atmosphere, I want to explain how this works, just our opportunity. Nitric oxides are converted to nitric acid, which trees absorb through their pores, also called stomata. It is the amount of nitric oxide that determines ozone levels in many forested regions of the United States.
You want to talk about the slides?
This one.
Yeah.
Well, the importance, basically, I think that's what it is. In my view, that is why it's important. That, and there's several slides, so it's. I'm going to continue.
These are the slides that just show. County planning has done a study on just where trees are and where they aren't, and
Right,
so this is the maps of
Yeah.
where there's a lack of tree canopy coverage, and it's over. They can do this with age and
Right,
poverty.
and yeah, there's also, so we broke out the maps showing where the tree canopy is, where it's lacking, and the legend might be a little bit hard to read, but the darker areas are where it's, you know, a good amount of coverage, the lighter green areas, not as much. And the map to the right, which is the percentage of population below poverty, just shows poverty rates in the county, dark purple being high poverty, and then the lightest lavender color being the least amount of poverty. And what you'll see, we're going to put these maps together. We broke them apart so that you could actually see it a little bit better, that there's not too much difference. You know, when you look at where the poverty is and the lack of tree canopy, they tend to fall in the same areas, just a little bit hard to see on the map when it's combined. But also wanted to mention that while they emit volatile organic gases, trees take up a variety of air pollutants, including both ozone and nitrous oxide, which reduces the ambient concentrations that we breathe. So here's a list of the 20 top 100 most populated cities in the United States that are considered asthma capitals. And asthma capitals are the cities that have the most challenging to live in if you have asthma. There are 8 risk factors that influence asthma outcomes: poverty, lack of health insurance, air quality, which we're mainly talking about here with trees, pollen count, long-term control medicine use. So think of somebody with COPD or a chronic lung condition where they have to have an inhaler. So that's a long-term control medicine that somebody might have to use. Also a quick relief medicine use, which would be the same type of device at times, smoke-free laws, and access to asthma specialists. All those 8 are risk factors that influence asthma outcomes. Breathing ozone can shorten your life. Ozone is harmful to breathe, and ozone aggressively attacks lung tissue by reacting chemically with your lung tissue. So, and again, with the importance of trees, more than 26 million people, a little less than 10% of Americans have asthma. 10 people die a day. The highest prevalence is older adults, African Americans, and those with diminished lung capacity. Most of these deaths can be treated with access to medical care, education on how to properly manage the disease, healthy housing, and clean air.
I think it was you, Jan. But I think I just want to.
That's the last one.
Yeah, just going back, I think that just the importance of the asthma is that we've got asthma problems in this county. We've got a lack of trees. Trees help with cooling neighborhoods, and they help with air quality. And when there is, more days where there's high heat, then there's more ground level ozone, which is a trigger of asthma. So I think there's this correlation that we think is really important. That as a place that has a lot of asthma, trees are a way. It's not going to solve all the asthma problems, but it's a way to help minimize it. It's also a way to help minimize cooling costs that people have. If you've got high heat days and you're living in an apartment or a house without air conditioning, having a tree around to help reduce the heat around your house is something important, especially if you can't afford to pay for your air conditioning. But if you do have air conditioning, then having a tree also provides shade, so you don't have to pay as much on your electricity bill to cool your house out. So there's kind of financial or economic reasons why we think trees help with just kind of minimizing the cost that everyday Cuyahoga residents would have to face.
So the project scope is, this goes back to here. So we're talking about $1 million a year for 5 years, looking at the county in its entirety and focusing on the areas, if possible, that have a lower canopy cover to kind of bring everybody up to the average at the very least. When we talked about the objectives of our program and how we wanted to see the program rolled out, just like really brainstorming so that it wasn't just taking money and just throwing it to the wind, because there's a right way to plant trees and a right way to have a tree program and a wrong way. So while it's going to be a work in progress, that we thought if we can get out there, get started, but start out, smart, slow and smart, that we think we're going to be really a model. So, looking again at the communities in the Cuyahoga County, being able to use the communities to be able to use that money to help enhance their tree program, their urban forestry program that they already have. We want to make sure that we can inspire people to think about maybe starting nurseries, because we don't really have any urban nurseries anymore. So someplace where we can get entrepreneurs to help, start, planting trees so that we can use them and transplant them in other places. Having a strong maintenance. Trees are like anything else. It's a capital investment. You can't just plant them willy-nilly. You need to plant them right. And I can take you around and show you where they haven't been planted right. And a lot of governmental entities that haven't done that right, and it's taxpayers' money. And that's what we were really concerned about. How do we ensure the people that are watching us out there, our constituents, that we're doing it right, that we've really thought about this process. So we want to have a strong maintenance program. We want to coordinate with efforts like the City of Cleveland Tree Plan, Holden Gardens, the Western Reserve Land Conservancy, all these organizations that have been meeting with as part of the Cleveland Tree Coalition, and over the past 3 years, brainstorming how do we do this? How do we move this program forward? We want to think about allowing plantings at some point on larger parcels, because when you think about the urban forest, if you can plant a bigger parcel, you're going to have trees, and you're going to have these kind of urban forests kind of placed, interspersed throughout the county. And then also looking to leverage additional private and public funds. And you might know that our sister agency, the Soil and Water Conservation District's sister agency, is in the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service. And we are working with them right now. We have cost share dollars to plant trees on private parcels of land. So being able to leverage those other kind of grants that are out there to do these programs, we thought that that's all part and parcel of the program.
So the reason why you're seeing all three of us here is that we are presenting this as a joint program. It was the idea of sustainability, and it's a component that actually was mentioned in the climate action plan, and also has a strong health component that would create a healthier community in our county, besides all of the aesthetics of trees and the benefits. But what we're proposing is a grant program with this $1 million that would be jointly administered by all three agencies: the Department of Sustainability, the County Planning Commission, and the Soil and Water Conservation District. County Planning has a lot of experience with administering grant programs. Currently, we administer the grant programs for the Ohio Public Works Commission. One is the $30 million state capital improvement program, which is the issue one funds that people vote for and allows for local control and local selection of road and bridge projects. The other is the $3 million Clean Ohio Green Space Conservation Program, which again allows for local control for selection of projects to promote green space conservation. So what we're proposing with this project is, with the money, that county planning would set up the program with input from Soil and Water and the Department of Sustainability, and run it in the same way we run the other programs for the Ohio Public Works Commission. Come up with criteria, create an application, advertise that this money is available, offer workshops for applicants so that they can come and be trained on how best to fill out the application and to better their chances to get this money for the programs that they want to have. County Planning has experience on doing that on the front end. However, on the back end, in terms of monitoring the progress and making sure that any grantee is actually using the money for what was proposed, would all be done through Soil and Water, because they have the expertise of looking at tree plantings and ensuring that the program is fulfilled in the way it was initially proposed.
Okay, so go ahead with it. Do you want to do the
Oh, okay,
timeline?
sure. Okay, so we actually even worked out a timeline because we would like to have this money be available this year to show progress and to show the commitment of the county, obviously the county council, that not only are trees important, but that health is important, because it's really hard to separate the two. And it's nice to have that significant health benefit also. So we are looking at this kind of a timeline with a pre-bid meeting with communities or with cities and also nonprofit organizations to happen the first week of July, to let them know about the program. So that would be the RFP saying this program's available, this is the money, this is the maximum dollar amount that would be awarded, these are the types of projects that would be funded. Also to let them know when the deadline is, when the proposals are due, which would be at the end of July, so that we could be announcing awards by the third week in August, because tree planting season happens typically in the fall and in the spring. So we've missed the spring planting, but we can capture it in the fall. So these are all the ways, the money can be used. Oftentimes, cities or communities will hire an arborist, but sometimes they don't have it within their budget, or they don't have a dedicated tax stream to do that. This could be one of the projects that could be funded. For communities that don't already do this, they could use the grant funds to hire an arborist to do a tree assessment and let them know, what types would be the right, what trees would be the right type to plant in the areas that they want planting. Also for cities to develop some kind of a maintenance, removal, and planting program. And again, new plantings where there isn't enough tree canopy currently. The urban tree canopy assessment is happening right now. County planning should have initial preliminary data showing the 2019 tree canopy for the county in July. So we'll have those numbers very soon, at the same time communities are applying for this funding. So again, keeping in mind that we would like to have the program help municipalities, but also recognize that there are nonprofits that work with municipalities and nonprofits that have a lot of skill and knowledge about this. And it could also be an economic development tool, as Janet mentioned, in terms of helping out small nurseries or small urban farmers.
Did I get it wrong way then?
Yeah,
You did
I think
very
we probably, we probably
So
covered
that's
that.
looking
Yeah.
at this because it was sitting out here.
So I just generally, so this is, the goal is to have county planning administer the program, and with soil and water kind of doing a lot of the monitoring. County planning would help develop the grant parameters and help develop scoring criteria, and that would happen soon, hopefully in the next 2 to 3 weeks. We would create instruction materials that Soil and Water would work on for applicants, schedule workshops. We're going to be advertising as soon as we get permission. We would try to do advertising first, second, third week of July, so that folks know about this. And we would be looking to get grants back, bids back in early August, and start with Soil and Water's help, kind of thinking through what makes the most sense and kind of the broad parameter for what we're trying to do. And then be able to announce grants by the end of August for this first round of plantings or planning, or some cities may just need to call some dead trees that they want to get out of the way. And, someone may have a great idea. I want to be a tree nursery, and I need, $20,000 to buy 20,000 saplings, and we're going to grow them and plant them and make them available for future years for cities to be able to take advantage of at a later date. So hopefully we'll be able to make those announcements then. So I think we're done with our PowerPoint. We're more than willing to take questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this information. Does anybody have questions from the committee? Ms. Jones and then Brown.
Well, it was a very thorough presentation. I just had an actual wrote my questions down as we. One question was, when you mentioned planting of the trees, you mentioned that there was a way to plant a tree incorrectly. Is that correct? Could you elaborate how do you plant a tree incorrectly?
Okay. You know, it's all about the soil you're placing it in, and it depends on the size of the tree, okay? So, you know, trees are site-specific, number one, that, you know, if you have a wet area, you need to know that that area is wet or shaded, so you need the right tree for the right location, number one. Number two, you know, trees come, you know, there's saplings, so that's like a little tree. I have one that I got 3 years ago, and I'm so proud of it. It's about 4 feet high right now. But, and those are easy to grow. You know, you just kind of dig a hole and put some compost in it, you know, but you always want to spread out the roots, you know, so it gives those roots a chance to really get in there and spread out through the soil. But the type of soil is really important too. And people always talk about how the soils here in Cuyahoga County are clay. And all soil has sand, silt, and clay in it, you know, so like anything, you can have too much of a good thing. So you wouldn't want totally sandy soil because that's going to present a problem for some plants and trees. And if it was clay soil, that's going to present a problem as well. So depending on what that soil is, you're going to want to amend the soil and make sure that those roots have enough room to grow. But the problem we see in the shoreways is a great example. You know, what was it, 2 years ago, those trees were planted and they're mostly dead. Trees that are, those bigger trees, they come in burlap, and they're balled and burlapped, it's called, and then they're in cages. And what a lot of places when they're planting, and this goes into, as the program develops, where, you know, things we need to think about in the future, is that when that tree's going to be planted, that cage needs to be cut off, the burlap needs to be stripped down, and the roots need to be splayed out so that tree has a chance. Most urban trees die within 6 or 7 years. You know, we don't want that investment. And that's why we, you know, all put our heads together, because if we're going to sit there and provide money for trees, we really want those trees to survive if we're going to restore canopy cover. So, and then once it's planted, it's watering and it's maintaining them. They recommend for the first 3 years that you're having a good like watering. You've seen those bags. There's like watering bags. You're going to mulch the tree at the very least, but they do have bags that you can just fill up with 5 gallons of water, and it kind of drip irrigation, or you're going to be responsible for watering that tree and mulching it every year, and not volcano mulching. You've seen it where it comes up the tree and that actually rots out the tree. So you want to keep the mulch away from the base of the tree, like around outside of the root flare. So it's really pretty simple and common sense, but it's not being done, and we're seeing a lot of trees. Like University Circle, when RTA planted those trees, all of them are gone. They died within a year. It's how they're planted, yeah.
You mentioned our canopy was at 220,000 trees at one point. Now it's down to 120.
Yeah.
What is there a targeted goal of restoration? Or are we trying to get to?
Yeah, it's a very ambitious goal in 2050, and off the top of my head, I don't know exactly what the numbers are, but we're talking a lot of trees. So we have to, it's really time is now to plan them. Do you know the exact numbers?
I don't, but for just our particular program, we haven't set a goal yet. I think we want to get through kind of this first round and see how we do, and then maybe in 2020 think about what should be the goal, and in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the road.
It's almost like the more so, not so much how many trees you plant, because people say, oh, we gave out 1 million seedlings. I got a seedling this year. You know, it's like a stick, you know, it's almost like a toothpick, a long toothpick. It didn't survive. So you can give away 1 million trees, but, you know, that's a statistic, but it didn't accomplish the goal. It didn't meet your objectives. So, you know, we're really about, you know, is it better to set a goal, or, you know, to have a modest goal and reach that and exceed it, but have those trees survive? That's what we really need to do.
To answer your question, the U.S. Forest Service does have recommendations for urban tree canopies in terms of amount. It's less than 50%. I think it's more like 41% in an urban area, and then in a non-urban area, it's a different percentage. I don't think any of us has those numbers here. So those would always be goals to shoot for, but it's going to take a little bit of time to build back up.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. Councilwoman Brown?
Thank you, Chairwoman. So also was interested in how many trees and also the type of trees that we would be striving to introduce back into the canopy. Do we have any thoughts around that?
There are recommendations through the Cleveland Tree Coalition. There are some recommendations about what type of trees we should be planting because of the advent of climate change, so kind of thinking ahead. One thing we don't want to do is the monoculture. So many places, and not just in Cleveland, Cuyahoga County, but around the country, where just, beech trees were planted, and then there was beech tree disease, and they died. Then the emerald ash borer, and you go to cities, Lincoln, Nebraska, they just tagged these beautiful trees, beautiful canopy, and because of the emerald ash borer, they had to tear them down. So planting and not having it be just one kind of species of trees, but mixing it up a little bit. And definitely we want to get trees that are suited again for the site. If it's a street tree, if it's going to be a tree and on a bigger lot, how much space is there? How tall can the tree be? We have a lot of overhead wires in the county, so we don't want to have a tree. You've seen them where they cut the trees like a V. It looks horrible. Yeah, not good for the tree at all.
So
But
the
can I
other,
also, I'm sorry.
go ahead.
But we do, I think thinking about what trees are going to make it for the long term is really important. So it may be trees that were native to, central Ohio that are going to make it here in the future. One of the things I saw working on this is that the Buckeye, where the Buckeye State may not be grown in the state of Ohio anymore. I mean, it may only be grown in Michigan and Canada because just the nature of where that's able to grow in the future. So thinking long term, and there's experts on this stuff who are kind of just understanding the tree species and diversity, as Jan said, is really important.
And that's the thing, like Buckeye trees. So across the street from our office, and we're over on East 33rd and Perkins, our landlord let us plant trees. So we have pollinator gardens. We planted 6 variety of trees, and 2 of them are Buckeyes. And this year they're doing really well, but they're slow-growing trees. Oaks are slow-growing trees. So I think one of the things to consider is, can we have a mix of faster-growing trees if we want to restore the canopy, and mix the faster-growing trees with some of the slower, more hardy, like an oak or a maple, and those kind of things. So it'll really be a mixed forest again.
Can any of you speak on how we have? I remember growing up, my grandmother had an apple tree, and you just don't see very many fruit trees, but they were more common.
That's your thing.
They were more common. So has there been any thought about restoring the fruit trees that can thrive in Cuyahoga County and also serve as a means of resources to the community for in food deserts and stuff
Right.
like that?
We actually had this discussion. We were kicking around a little bit what would be some of the program parameters. And I'm just familiar with the city where I used to work, that that city offered any tree to a person that they wanted on their tree lawn. So sometimes people would experiment and it didn't work. But there was somebody in the city who wanted to make his front yard an urban garden. And so he specifically planted apple trees so the kids walking down the street could pick an apple and keep on going. But I'm familiar with the city of Shaker Heights, planting in vacant lots, orchards. And so that type of thing was something that we were kicking around, separate from the idea of the nurseries growing the trees, how to encourage communities to think differently about their use of trees so that it could give, jobs to people who might be looking for a job to plant the trees and to take care of the trees, and then also a free food source. So that would be a little bit of convincing for a community to say, maybe you don't want to harvest this and bring it to a farmer's market. Maybe you might want to let somebody walking home from school pick the apple. Or maybe you want to combine that with somebody who does want to do it as a little sideline business. So those are the kinds of program elements that we're still trying to figure out, because we'd like to expand it to encourage those kinds of uses. and, think outside of the box a little bit, that it doesn't only have to be tree lawn trees, and then, what Jan had mentioned, and you had asked earlier about the types of trees, and we'd be mindful about what kinds of trees are placed where. We're aware that tree lawn trees, sometimes depending on the street and the snowplow traffic, can't survive with the salt, but the state arborist is always advising municipal arborists about the types of trees and the latest hybrid and things like that. So, yeah, we would like to really encourage that, as Janet said, and make sure that the trees live and that people can watch them grow. And, it would serve so many purposes to have these trees be planted. And we would like to meet all those needs if possible. I mean, that's our goal.
It's funny that that's because across the street, there's a big mulberry tree, and we've been in our office 2 years now, and people come out when those mulberries ripe, they spread, people in the neighborhood, and they spread like a white cloth and like shake the tree to get the berries. And people do that all over the place. I've seen people on the freeway, the edges of the freeways, collecting berries, So there are people that forage, and that would be like really exciting if, you had places in the city and people were invited, come and pick the apples, come pick the pears, and yeah.
My final question is, there was a number, I think it was 41%, is the goal or the recommendation of, I guess, the tree canopy. And given the number of buildings and homes and all the things that are constantly being erected, how does that number come into play with that? Can you help me understand the calculation? Because it just seems like we won't even have enough land to accommodate the trees.
Yeah, so I think I don't have the answer right now. I know that it's something that we want to work on. We do have a lot of land, right, in this that is vacant land right now, with land bank land, and so I think there's working with the land banks, I guess. There's opportunities there. There's other large lots of land out there that aren't even land bank land that we can take advantage of. So I think those are things that, as we hopefully we really do want to get some money out in the street by this planning season, and we're going to learn some things about how to move forward on that. But it would be great to the city of Cleveland's at 19%. I think Brooklyn is at 13%, or Brook Park is, or some first ring suburbs are really low, and there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of available land still to take advantage of to put trees back into, and we want to figure out how to do that.
So one final
But
question.
I think you
then.
would,
Go ahead.
excuse me one second, I think we would want to make sure that it's, because we want development, right? So how do you balance that? And that if we're going to spend the money on a lot, plant some trees there, that it's not going to be, tomorrow it's going to be a development project. And that's the kind of concern with land bank lots, because the idea is to turn those lots over with possible. So there's some strategic thinking that'll need to be done, and some, I think, coordination with the communities and stuff. So that's why the assessment, the idea of a community assessment would help, because they would know, what their plan is, where their priority conservation areas are, where their priority development areas would be as well.
So would the land that we be aiming to utilize be primarily county land, or will we be incorporating residents in this program and hoping maybe to get them involved in some capacity?
Yeah, at least for year one, the idea is that we'll make the money available, and that cities and nonprofits can apply for it, and that the cities will have some idea at a local level where they want to plant trees. Plus, the assessment that's being now will help kind of shape where we think priorities are. So if you've got a community that's got 50% tree canopy right now, and that city's applying, they may not be higher up on the list than a city that's got 20%.
Council President Brady.
I get the part where, to some extent, you're sort of a lot of people are involved, a lot of expertise, but you're sort of also going to kind of learn as you go, particularly right initially, and so I understand that. when you talk about the trees dying on the shoreway and those kinds of things, and that's a disturbing, thing. And I'm, wondering, I'm not so much needing an answer, but I'm posing a concern, is that the way I'm hearing the way this is set up, I'm concerned about how you maintain inequality control in a way that, prevents us from, wasting our money, for one thing, and not achieving our goal, more importantly. And it seems, and maybe it's, and there's a good side to this, but, it seems so decentralized in some ways to me, from just what I'm hearing. When you talk about, a CDC, for instance, help me out with this. How does a CDC necessarily have the expertise to make sure that how are we going to try to maintain a quality control over this project that makes it work?
Okay, let's take this. One of the things, a lot of the CDCs through the Western Reserve Land Conservancy, the Sherwood Tree Program, that people from across the county have participated in that tree stewards program. So it's multiple classes, and they learn how to plant the trees and prune the trees. So there are people out there, and the idea is that you become a tree steward, and you're going to be the boots on the ground to kind of help out with that. So that's part of it. And as the program progresses into the future, Colby Sattler and those folks, and Jim Merkakis has been involved in the periphery, to kind of marshal those forces to get out there and be extra sets of eyes and ears in the community, because I don't think one organization could be everywhere. But being there when those trees are planted, for instance, soil and water and the stormwater, and when we're doing our stormwater work, erosion and sediment control, when those development sites go from being in the works to completion, they have to have a post-construction stormwater feature. If it's tree planting, or if it's a bioretention cell, something like that, we try to coordinate with those site managers to be there to make sure those installations are done correctly. So that's kind of an example of kind of coordinating the affair. So if it's University Heights and we're going to be putting trees in here, we're going to be out there, or we're going to marshal the tree steward, volunteers to make sure that those things are put in
So,
there.
Jan, we're going to monitor.
Yes.
We're going to monitor whether it's a municipality or whether it's a CDC or whatever it is. We're going to put in place the ability to monitor the quality of this project.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that trees won't fail, because they could, but the idea is to be as proactive.
We know trees fail.
Yes.
But I could also add, Mr. Brady, that there could be a requirement with the grant program, and these are the types of things that we're trying to flesh out right now, to require that there be a consulting arborist working with the applicant to, help the applicant know things, that Jen was explaining, the proper way to plant and maintain, and that could be a requirement
Not
of
to
the
interrupt,
grant.
but that's what I really meant was by the program seems very decentralized to me, just hearing what I'm hearing, and having that kind of quality control over a very decentralized program would be a concern for me. And that's all I'm saying is, I can see that you're building something here. So, I'm not going to act like that's not the case, but not to ask the bad questions. This is $1 million now. It's the proposal, I believe, is for $1 million over the next 5 years, total of $5 million. And we do biennial budgets, so I would assume we're talking about $2 million in the biennial budget this fall. I don't know if anybody's thought about it that way, so I don't want to make this heavy or anything. It's not that much money, but is that your assumption?
That's my assumption.
Okay. Well, it seems one of the things, I don't want to give the messengers a hard time because I know you're all committed to what you're doing. One of the things that always concerns me is when we want to do big things, we want to do important things, we want to do what we need to do. And I'm always concerned when we have a program that means so much, like all the material we went over about all the issues that are involved here. And you know, I always makes me a little uncomfortable when we sell all the wonderful reasons why we need a canopy, and yet we're not actually asking for the resources that are needed to do it. And this is not just this program; it's lots of programs. It's just a statement, I guess. And I'm not advocating that we say let's double your budget or something like that. It seems to me you've got some work to do along the way here. But I just am always sometimes frustrated by big ideas with very little funding, and this concerns me in that regard as well. That's all I got.
I think one of the
Director
hopes,
Fuller.
at least the county executive had, is that this will also trigger other entities putting money into tree canopy. So I think the city of Cleveland's thinking about this. I think some of the foundations are, some of the hospitals maybe. So there's some other efforts out there around tree canopy. I'm not going to count on them, to be honest with you, but I think this is what we can do at the
Get
moment.
started.
So, yeah.
Councilman Miller?
Madam Chair, Director, I'd like to follow up on a couple of the lines of questioning from the Council President. I don't think that we have the capability to monitor each of what might be 25 or 40 grant programs, depending on the amount each gets. I think it's very important that part of the application process be to assure that each applicant has expertise or procedures in place to ensure a quality process. Yes, I think we probably should do some follow-up from our end, but I think that the important part is to see that each of the applicants has the capability and does it.
Councilman, I think we agree with you. I think it's why this is kind of a competitive grant process, is that there will be criteria to make decisions about who to give grants to. Some of this is I think as Susan said earlier, some cities don't have the abilities right now they don't have arborists, they don't have kind of tree professionals, and it's kind of doing a plan, right? And they'll come back to us in a year later, say, hey, we've got a plan now, and we've got some expertise, and we want to do planting. We want money for planting. Some of it is if you're going to do planting, then you have to have a maintenance program, right? So those are kind of some of the criteria that we're going to build into the process. And I think it speaks to Councilman Brady's question too, is that we don't want to see, 50,000 trees planted, and 25,000 of them die, right? That would be both embarrassing and it would be just bad, right? Bad in and of itself. So that's, I think, embedded in this, and we want to do this right, and this kind of criteria that I think we've got expertise from soil and water, planning, and other, really smart people who, the state tree arborist is really interested in this program as well. So I think we've got some smart people who are going to help us kind of develop the program.
Madam Chair, Director, do we have a number on how many trees we're currently losing per year in Cuyahoga County?
There's then the Cleveland Tree Plan has a number, and it was a percentage reduction they were seeing every year, and I don't know what it is offhand, and I can find that for you and get it over to you. But by 2040, I think they're at 19% now, and they estimated if we kept losing at the rate we were losing now, we would be down to like 14% by 2040, I think was the number.
Madam Chair, Director, do we have confidence that if we put in $1 million a year, that we would at least be able to cover the decline and hopefully have some increase?
I'm trying to do the math right now. Rough equivalency, maybe a little less than what the decline is. I think we're going to need help from other entities, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Madam Chair, Director, that's where my concern lies. I'm just concerned that it's not going to be enough to really move the needle, and I think back to one other project that the county did under the prior administration which was the idea of creating a college savings account for every child that entered kindergarten in the county, and I know an important part of the sell on this was that we're going to get parents to put in money. We're going to get foundations and community organizations to put in money. We're going to leverage all these other resources, and the long and the short of it is that hardly anybody else did anything, and by itself it didn't work, and we had to scrap it. You know, and I don't want to see the same thing happen with this. I think we need to go out there on the front end and identify who the partners are and what they're able to do, and I think that's important. And
if I may, the Cleveland Tree Coalition, it's about 40 organizations, government and nonprofit organizations like the Cleveland Clinic and Soil and Water, City of Cleveland, the Holden Parks and Gardens, some really, like Mike said, some really brilliant people. The urban forester, Alan Seifert, he's like really excited. So a lot of this information came from what he's seen over 30 years. So the Cleveland Tree Coalition is moving forward. They have a strategic plan. They're talking about they want to bring somebody on board to help kind of oversee and be out there in marketing and obtaining grants as well, developing a program. So it's not going to be able to be done by one organization. It is going to have to be multiple partners. But there seems to be a collective will and desire to do this. And so, to leverage those resources, I think that the foundation's already been built. Now it's just taking it and implementing the program, but implementing it carefully and strategically, and making people accountable. I said that earlier, that it's a lot of money, and it's not lofty goals; they're attainable goals if done correctly. And it's not going to just be street trees; it's going to be kind of different efforts.
Madam Chair, Director,
Councilman Miller.
I think we have enough available brilliance. I think what we need is resources.
Yeah, right.
And I'd just like to bring up one more point before I sign off, and I know we've brought this to their attention and kind of been rebuffed, but I think we want to renew this effort, which is that the regional sewer district should make tree canopy part of their process for managing stormwater. And they've implemented a very, very expensive program involving using a lot of iron and steel to create more capacity to handle water, and if they took only a small portion of that money and put it into trees, we could have a heck of a program, you know. So I think that we really need to make a concerted effort on that and try to get them to come on board as a partner in a meaningful way.
We have spoke with them about perhaps, you know, right now they do give residential and commercial credits for stormwater management practices, and trees are not part of that right now, but there are programs around the country that do provide those incentives, so reduction in fees. So that was one conversation we've already had with them, and we're bringing it back to the table again. A little bit different than providing money, but they're aware of what's, you know, going on, and they are interested, and trees are the, you know, no pun intended, well, there's pun intended, low-hanging fruit. I mean, it's like, it really is, it really is something that doesn't have to cost a homeowner a lot of money. We know we advocate for rain gardens, but we could have tree gardens, and you know, it's my firm belief that the trees actually, once they grow, are going to have a lot more benefit than a rain garden. I love rain gardens, you know, they collect the stormwater, but a tree, when the canopy is good, like I said earlier, it's going to attenuate that water. It's aesthetic. It provides all these other benefits that a rain garden just isn't. And so the sewer district does give, you know, fee credits for rain gardens and rain barrels, so why not for trees? But that conversation, again, it's something that is going to have to develop, I think, you know, it's the ongoing process.
And Councilman, I can't tell you, you know, look, I think there's a lot of discussions going on about trees across the community and different entities. I think at some point people are looking for someone to take the first step, and that's what we're doing with this $1 million a year, as minimal as it may be for the total need. But someone's got to take the first step, and I think the county is doing that. And I think you're right that we've got some maybe moral high ground in some respects, and need to take advantage of that and start organizing, or you know, nudging or berating or getting other folks involved in this, because this is really important stuff. But it's hard for us to do that if we're not expending some resources to do that, and I think that's what we're doing here.
And may I add that I have seen these kinds of tree programs work. It worked in the city where I worked, where I served. We had a very extensive tree program, prescriptions by arborists, a per street, a per tree canopy assessment. We're not necessarily talking about that, but that could be something that we could consider with this program. Also, as part of county planning's management of the administration of this program, we would be providing you an annual report. But to start here, and Councilman, you had mentioned, actually both councilmen had mentioned, you know, concerns about, is this enough money and will it work? You know, obviously the annual report will have the metrics so that you can make decisions for funding in future years. But, you know, we'll also be able to demonstrate that although it's small, that it does have an impact, particularly in these communities that have such a low tree canopy. You know, you might look at it like a CDBG type of program. Every community that would apply for that funding didn't get it, but the ones that did, it was impactful. And, you know, I'd like to make the analogy to the Ohio Public Works Commission funding. Everybody who applies doesn't get the funding, but for the ones that do, it's impactful. So this will be impactful no matter how much money is funding the program.
Any other questions? So I think it will be impactful. I don't care if it's 20,000 trees that survive in communities like Warrensville Heights or Maple Heights that are depleted. And if they get the lion's share through this process, that's going to make a world of difference in that community. I don't think you can underplay the importance to a community in terms of the investment, the pride. It's like the broken window theory too. I mean, if you beautify a community, it helps with crime reduction, it helps with human health. It just really, we're living in places of like a concrete jungle that Janis Joplin sang about, and it's here. You know, our pavements cement, we have blighted buildings, it's awful, and that breeds I think it really just plays into how we live and respect our neighborhoods. So, but I agree that, to me, this is a similar process that we had in place for the demo fund, and how we needed to put rules in place and policies in place around that to make sure that the communities that receive county money were, had their fiduciary duty and did things right. And I think we have to do that sooner than later. If this is going to happen and the committee supports this, I don't know what the process is. Councilman Miller, this was pulled from the fiscal agenda. Does it go to the council meeting?
The process is that if you don't hear a lot of pushback here today, you could assume that you could put it on the next fiscal agenda that's submitted to the council, and expect that it would pass.
So as chair, in the next, is there any way you can outline some parameters around this? Yes?
Started on that, yeah.
Absolutely. We've already had those discussions. We've had several meetings already. I'm absolutely sure that if you give us a date, we can give you a pretty fully fleshed out program so that you will.
When would is this a fall planting scenario?
That's what we're hoping for. Yeah.
And so what's the time? I mean, I saw your outline.
Yeah, like October, November is a typical planting season for fall trees.
Would
before
we
the
like
ground
more
is frozen.
time as a committee to get feedback on what the parameters would be? Yes? No?
I said yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
We
Okay.
can certainly come back to you with the grant program.
Okay,
And
Councilman Jones?
to use your demo analogy, we used the land bank. We were able to say, they have a proven record, this is what they do. Okay, no one's perfect, but this is what they do. They have relationships with all of the cities. And so we knew we could get the work done using the land bank as opposed to the Department of Development. If there are 30 partners, who in there, who grows trees, who grows them well? I mean, bring back a program, parameters, and who can do this work.
As a follow-up, however, there are communities that were capable of handling their own demos that did not. We had the land bank for those municipalities that did not have the capacity. There were, South Euclid, for example, was set up and ready to go, City of Euclid. There were communities already ready to facilitate and administer the demo program. Many did not, so we put money into the land bank to kind of carry that weight of communities that didn't have the infrastructure, and I think this would be similar. Communities are well-resourced to plant, or there are arbor cities that are ready to go, but there's some cities that are not. And for those cities that are not, how are we gonna handle those cities? And I think that's already in your vision, your viewpoint. Council President.
Listening to what what you're saying, I completely agree that this is a bit fuzzy because by its nature, taking on something this big and talking about it on such a grand scale, and yet we really are starting very small. So while I completely agree with the fact that we have to work toward having that kind of accountability and ability to track what we're doing and all the things that have been discussed here, I do think that the $1 million is a modest enough of a sum that there shouldn't be anything to stand in the way of us allocating those funds and getting people started. Like what I've heard is like, how do we have the authority to how do we get the authority, I'll use the word authority, to get people to work with us if we don't have any money on the table at all. And so, I think, putting some money on the table, showing an indication that we're going to be involved in this is going to be important, I think, for them to be able to organize this and get us to where we need to be. But otherwise, it becomes sort of an abstract conversation unless there's some commitment toward it.
And I would also say,
Councilman Jones and Miller.
if we're talking $1 million, do we start at $1 million? In the big scheme of things, it's not a lot. But again, there have been programs where we started with smaller amounts and had to prove our worth just to get up to $1 million. Maybe we don't start at $1 million. Maybe we scale up as we prove our ability to accomplish the goal.
Councilman Miller, I think for this project, the million's the place to start, just because of what it entails.
I think the scale of it, you know, is the reason I would want to start no less than that.
Okay.
It's reasonable in context here.
Yeah.
Councilman Miller?
I'm in favor of getting started, and we should move forward. But I would note that the normal schedule has been for the fiscal agendas to come in the second council meeting of the month, and so we could begin preparing to do that. But we could also have another meeting in 2 weeks if we wanted to, and flesh this out a little bit more before it came to the council to be voted upon at the meeting on June 25th.
That sounds reasonable to me, and by then you could come back, hopefully with a more pronounced plan.
I think we could come back with the application, with the instructions. We will probably scale this up internally in planning to get ready for the workshop, given the timing. So we will be preparing all those materials, so you will see what communities would see and you can vet it. You can say, you didn't ask one more question or something, and and then you'll see exactly what the vision is for the program, and what we will be talking to communities about.
Okay. Any questions or concerns from the committee if we move forward in this vein? We okay? So do I need a motion to move it to the council meeting? It just goes. Okay. Thanks. But we'll be back hopefully in 2 weeks with your due diligence.
Thank you
Thanks
for
so
the
much. It was a good
opportunity.
presentation and important.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Excited, thanks.
I don't have miscellaneous business. If there's no comments, so I'm going to move to adjourn. All in favor? Aye. Done. Thank you.